it's a chicken hawk. That's what my dad told me. My dad was a good Joe. That was his name, too. My dad only went to 4th grade. My mother went to 8th. She was more educated than my dad. My mother was only 17 when she got married. She was very conscious of the fact that she didn't want her daughters to get married so young. I think perhaps it was because she was so young. But in those days, my mother's family was on a farm. My dad's family was on a farm. And at that time, the only thing for a girl to do was probably to get married. She spent a lot of her time helping people in her family with their babies. So she figured she might just as well have babies too. She lost 2. She lost her first one. His name was Raymond. And she lost the last one. It was a girl, and her name was Antoinette. My brother Bert was a very smart guy. He graduated from high school, and then he went to business college. He married Helen Bleed, and that marriage didn't last too long. He wound up in the liquor business too, and he sold outlandishly big beers, and it was called the home of the Hoopensoccer. That's all I remember. Sib, he was a salesman in his early life, and he used to work for the Jewel Tea Company, and would travel. And when he would go somewhere, he would always send something home for us littler kids. Sibby was so nice. But he was in the liquor business, and his death was brought on by drinking. Armella raised us kids. She never went to high school. She was really our second mother. I remember when she went to the convent, how we cried. Oh, with us little girls, we cried so. But that's what she did. She went to the Notre Dame convent, and they educated her, and she wound up being a school teacher. That was a combination of Joe and Ann. My mother's name was Ann, my dad's name Joe. So it was Joe Ann Niece. That was her name. Laura was very smart. When she got out of high school, my mother knew a lady who worked for Wisconsin Power and Light Company, and my mother spoke to her about my sister Laura, and could she find a job for her at Wisconsin Power and Light, and she did. She was awful good to my parents, because when she worked at Wisconsin Power and Light Company, she got my parents their first refrigerator that was put out by the Wisconsin Power and Light Company. It was a General Electric. She went with Jimmy when he was a married man, and of course my folks thought that was terrible. They had to get that marriage annulled, but it worked out. And then she got permission to marry Jimmy, and he was the nicest guy. He was a fuller brush man, and he employed a lot of the nephews in the family. Brother Joe was the driver in the family. My dad was a terrible driver. I think the youngest one on that picture was my brother Roman. There was an apartment building across the street from my dad and mother. And Joe had, in the meantime, gotten married to a Frances. She was a girl from Lancaster. He sold that building, and it had to come down. And Joe had a good father-in-law, and the father-in-law and my dad signed for him to rebuild that apartment building. Joe is the one who adopted 2 children, and Ann and Bobby. Pete was a great guy. He worked for my dad when he was very young. He never went to high school because he was such a good worker. He worked for my dad as a plasterer. He married a Worley woman. They had a daughter and they had a little boy, and the boy died. But they had a daughter, Joanne, but she is dead now too. Lenny was he was so small when he was born that he could fit in a cigar box. He was a good kid. He also worked for that Matt Carl's, the meat man, and he was not too hot in school. In fact, when he went to high school, he was short a credit or 2, and my mother called up. Agamemnon Whaler was the name of the principal, and she talked to him, and she told him that Lenny learned the meat trade while he was in high school, and wouldn't he give Lenny some credit for that, for school. And the Whaler graduated Lenny. He got him through high school. He married Rita Geminder, and he ran that Second Ward meat market on Johnson Street. Lenny drank, but he wasn't as heavy a drinker as some of them, but he drank his share. A lot to say about Roman. He was a great guy. He was a very talented fellow. He was a wonderful cabinet maker. He was a trombone player in the band at Central High School. Rummy used to go down to the bootleg joint and get a small pint of whiskey, and he'd bring it for the band director at Central. He had the best sense of humor, and he played the harmonica. He was a good harmonica player. Rummy was married to Mary. They had 4 kids. They had twins. Jean and Joan were twins. Allie was named after St. Aloysius. Allie was a case all by himself because he was, you might have called him your student, because when he was a boy, When I was able to remember him as a kid, he wasn't too much older than me. He would go to the library every summer and bring himself a bunch of books home, and he would read all those books every summer. He was a great reader, and he learned the plastering business. Oh, he also was a violin player, and he would instead of carrying that violin, he would just pull it along to go to school. Al was married once before, and his wife died, but he had a daughter, Armella, and cute little girl. Maria, when she was up at Holy Redeemer, they had a Christmas play, and they fixed Marie up so she looked like the Blessed Virgin. You know, she had kind of a long face like the Blessed Virgin. She was very pretty as the Blessed Virgin. She took piano lessons from Sister Martina, as I did as well, and she hated it. We used to have to go over to the sister's house where she would have her lesson, and she hated it so bad that she was going to run out the front porch door, which she did, and she fell and broke her leg. Well, that eliminated her piano lessons. She liked the boys. We had a boy next door that she was kind of fond of, but we took care of that, so that didn't go any farther. She went to Edgewood High School. When she was 19, she married Jim Shipley. And he was quite an athlete. I was a runt. I was the good seed. I studied piano for many years. I was a teacher for a while. I got married on Valentine's Day. And I met Hal in the Capitol. I worked for the Bureau of Personnel, and he saw me at the stand. They had a little lunch stand down on the first floor. I got introduced to him, and from that day on, I got acquainted with him, and we went out, and he never turned Catholic. He was not a Catholic, but he was such a good person. He went to church every Sunday with me. We were married 67 years. We called him Bud. He played cornet. A lot of us played musical instruments. Buddy and I were quite close as kids. We walked to school together. Boys from my class and at Holy Redeemer were friends of Bud's. Nobody wanted to call him Vincent. Vincent, I think Vincent is a saint's name. Oh, he got a job in the fire department. He was a good fireman. He had a lot of capacity for that. He married Lois Muzzer. They lived next door in a flat building that my folks owned. Irene, the youngest one in the family. I was close to Irene. When I graduated from high school, she graduated from 8th grade. She used to fix curls in the front of my hair because she was good at doing that. I couldn't do it. She was a more popular girl in high school than I ever was. And that's where she met John at Edgewood. You know, we used to kid Irene because Buddy and I were a little older than her. And she used to get bruises on her legs. And you know what we told her? We told her if you press hard on a bruise, that is good for it. And she did it. Anything we told her to do, she would do. She was younger and not as knowledgeable as we were. My dad, he spoke a lot of German terms. When I was a little girl, I played the piano a lot. I would be at the piano all the time. And my dad used to call me a Klimperhannes. What that means, I don't know. But he'd say, there's that Klimperhannes again. Well, my folks would often speak German when they wouldn't want us to understand what they were talking about. But we kids were pretty sharp. We could understand. We played tricks on my dad. You know, my dad smoked a pipe. And at one time, my sister Marie and I were really cut-ups. And we cut up rubber bands and put that in his pipe. And that's what he found out when he began to smoke. Another thing he did, he smoked summertime tobacco. And we always kidded him because there was a girl on that can of tobacco. We always told my dad that's why he got that tobacco, because that girl was on the tobacco can. She didn't smile much at a lot of times because she had a lot on her mind. My mother was a very good cook, and she always had plenty of food on the table for all of us kids. She made a lot of German things, like we had one thing with noodles that she always made, the homemade noodles. And the noodle dough was spread so it would take care of a few onions that had been fried or marbleized, I guess you'd call that. And then that dough was folded over it, and then it was boiled again, and then it was served with melted butter. And that was a German dish. They were, in German, it was called Windbeidels. Now what that means, I don't know. We had another German dish was called Knädel and Eier, which was dumplings and eggs that she made. Eier is eggs in German. She would make head cheese, and of course we had that a lot. Another thing my mom did was kill chickens. We had a little stump out in the backyard where she could lay the head of the chicken, and she took an axe and she chopped the head off. Then that chicken ran all over the yard like it was going out of style. And then brought the chicken in, and we kids all had to help with the dressing the chicken, getting rid of the chicken feathers. And she would dress the chicken, take out the insides, and when it was all set, then it was cooked or fried or whatever way she made it. When we'd sit at the kitchen table, none of us wanted to sit next to Ma, because if you didn't behave, you got, in German it's called a Knuppus. You get a Knuppus on your head. So you behaved yourself. They made sauerkraut. It would be down in the basement and in a cracked jar, huge one. It had kind of a, not a nice odor. I love sauerkraut. To this day, I'm a sauerkraut eater. My dad couldn't drive a car for a long time because when he did his plastering work, he drove a horse to work. And the horse's name was Daisy. And then he learned to drive a Ford truck. That was a real flying cloud. I think a lot of our family get-togethers was like for birthdays, and then we would get together sometimes for a dinner. My mother would have a big dinner, and we'd all get together. We would go out to Marksville. Now, Marksville is where my mother was born and raised, in the farm there. And that community was named after my grandfather, John Marks, and named Marksville. I graduated in 1935. And I had brothers at home that couldn't get work. And I got a job for the state. And I gave my money home till I was 21, because my mother had those boys that couldn't get a job, and I helped with the supporting of them. During the Depression, my dad always got some work because he did little patch jobs. He didn't do any big jobs, but he did patching, and that was part of the support of the family too. But my brothers couldn't get work. It was hard times. We all lived through it. We were all well fed, but we didn't forget to say our prayers. That was an important thing in our home. Pearl Harbor? We were all sitting in a little house next to my folks. We had the radio turned on, and we heard the bombing of Pearl Harbor. We knew it meant war. My husband was drafted. We were married on Valentine's Day, 1942. That was in February, and in June he was drafted. Buddy's draft number came up, and he he was drafted into the Marines, and Buddy was on Iwo Jima. He saw all the tragedy that happened there. He never talked about it unless you would prod him to talk about it. He talked about, he said you didn't pray at that time that you got hurt. You prayed that you would be killed because there were so many who were hurt and probably died as a result of it. But that was very sad. At one time I watched a documentary on television about Iwo Jima. I feel kind of cry when I think about that. And they were putting up the flag on Iwo Jima. And Buddy was home at that time, and I called him up and I said, Bud, were you there when they raised the flag? And he said, yes. And I said, well, you're to be commended for all that you did. And I feel bad about it yet. She was ill a long time in bed, and we girls would take turns going up to be with her at night. But that's where she passed away. He had taken the rubbish out in front of the house, and there was a curb there. And then he backed up and fell. And he had to go to the hospital, and he had to have a joint, the ball joint in his hip replaced. And he had that surgery, and he seemed to have recovered very well. But on the day that he was going to come home from the hospital, he died. We were little, and my dad, he took us all and gave us a little pony ride on his foot. And he'd go hup, 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 Pferdchen lauf, lauf, galopp, Eberstock and Eberstein do die Abonnet Wehenbein. That means gallop and hop over stones and over sticks, but don't do anything to get pain in your legs. That's what he said to us. When we came down in the morning and we said, Gelobt sei Jesus Christus, and my mother would say, Ewigkeit Amen. That means, blessed be Jesus Christ, and her response was now and forever, amen.